The ultimatum. The morning sun rose over Kepler 442b, casting golden light across the settlement that humanity had named New Providence. Commander Elena Vasquez stood at the observation window of the colonial headquarters, watching farmers tend their fields in the valley below. 2 years of hard work had transformed this alien world into something that felt like home. 3,000 colonists had built lives here, raised children, and dreamed of a future among the stars. Elena had fought hard to make this colony succeed, and now those dreams were about to be tested in ways none of them could have imagined. The emergency transmission arrived without warning. Every screen in the command center suddenly displayed the same image. A creature that looked like it had been carved from living obsidian stared out at them with eyes that burned like molten gold. Its voice, translated by standard communication protocols, carried the weight of absolute authority. Elena's blood ran cold as she recognized the species. The Chromath hegemony controlled 17 star systems and commanded military forces that had crushed a dozen civilizations. They were not known for mercy or negotiation. The message was simple and devastating. Humanity had 30 days to evacuate all colonies beyond the Sol system and retreat to Earth. Any human presence outside their home system after that deadline would be considered an act of war. The Chromath claimed that humanity had violated ancient territorial agreements that predated human space travel by thousands of years. Treaties that humanity had never seen, laws that humanity had never agreed to, boundaries that humanity had never been told existed. None of that mattered to the Chromath. They had spoken, and they expected immediate obedience. Elena immediately contacted Earth. The conversation with Admiral James Chen at United Earth Defense Headquarters lasted 3 hours. The news was worse than she had feared. The Chromath had sent identical messages to all 7 human colony worlds and every deep space outpost. 15 million people were being told to abandon everything they had built and return to an Earth that was already struggling with overpopulation. The logistics alone were impossible. Humanity did not have enough ships to evacuate that many people in 30 days, and even if they did, Earth could not absorb them all. The military situation was even more hopeless. Earth's entire defense fleet consisted of 42 warships. They were good ships built with the best technology humanity could develop, but they were designed for patrol duties and pirate suppression. The Chromath hegemony maintained a standing military force of over 3,000 vessels. Their ships were larger, faster, and equipped with weapons that could crack planets. Intelligence reports suggested that a single Chromath dreadnought could destroy Earth's entire fleet without sustaining significant damage. The math was brutal and clear. Humanity could not win a conventional war. Elena called a meeting of the Colonial Council that evening. The 12 representatives gathered in the conference room, their faces reflecting the fear and anger that everyone felt. Governor Michael Torres spoke first, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. He had given up a comfortable life on Earth to help build New Providence. His wife and 3 children were here. The thought of abandoning everything because some alien empire decided humanity did not belong made him want to scream. Other council members echoed his sentiments. They had not come billions of kilometers just to run home at the first sign of trouble. The debate raged for hours. Some argued for compliance. The Chromath were too powerful to resist. Evacuation would be difficult but not impossible if they started immediately. Better to lose the colonies than to lose everything in a war humanity could not win. Others demanded resistance. This was their home now. They had earned it with years of backbreaking work. If the Chromath wanted New Providence, they would have to take it by force. Elena listened to all of them, understanding both perspectives. She had seen war before, had watched good people die for causes both noble and foolish. She knew the cost of fighting impossible battles. Earth's response arrived the next morning. The United Earth government was divided. The Security Council had voted 6-5 in favor of attempting negotiation while preparing for evacuation. They were sending diplomatic envoys to the Chromath homeworld to plead for more time and to argue against the validity of treaties that humanity had never been part of. Admiral Chen's private message to Elena was more direct. The diplomats would fail. The Chromath did not negotiate with species they considered inferior. Earth was buying time to organize evacuations and to prepare the fleet for what was almost certainly going to be a one-sided slaughter. Elena made her decision that night. She recorded a message to Admiral Chen, knowing that it would likely be her last official communication with Earth Command. She explained her reasoning carefully. The Chromath expected humanity to run. They expected fear and compliance. Every species they had ever encountered had either submitted or been destroyed. Humanity needed to break that pattern, not because they could win, but because they needed to prove that they would not simply roll over and accept whatever fate others decided for them. Even if New Providence fell, even if every human colony was lost, the message needed to be clear. Humanity would not go quietly into extinction. The Admiral's response came back faster than expected. He did not order her to stand down. Instead, he sent her classified files that contained everything Earth's intelligence services had gathered about Chromath military tactics, ship designs, and strategic doctrine. There was also a personal note. Chen had served in the Unification Wars, had seen Earth's nations tear each other apart before finally coming together. He understood what Elena was trying to do. If humanity was going to face annihilation, they would do it on their feet, fighting with everything they had. He could not officially authorize resistance, but he would not stop her either. Elena began planning. New Providence had no warships, no military installations, no weapons designed for space combat. What they did have was a mining operation that used powerful industrial equipment to extract resources from the asteroid belt at the edge of the system. They had cargo haulers with engines designed to move massive loads across interplanetary distances. They had a colony full of engineers, scientists, and ordinary people who had proven they could solve impossible problems. Elena called a meeting of the technical staff and laid out her idea. They thought she was insane at first, but as she explained the details, understanding began to dawn in their eyes. The plan was simple in concept but terrifyingly difficult in execution. They would turn every piece of equipment they had into a weapon. Mining lasers designed to cut through rock could be reconfigured to target ships. Ore haulers could be loaded with explosives and turned into missiles. The industrial fabricators used for construction could manufacture thousands of small drones, each one carrying just enough explosive to damage a warship's sensors or weapons systems. They would not fight like a conventional military force because they were not one. They would fight like desperate people defending their home with whatever tools they had available. The work began immediately. Every engineer and technician on New Providence threw themselves into the project. They worked 20-hour days, pushing equipment beyond its design specifications, improvising solutions to problems that no one had ever faced before. The mining lasers were pulled from their mountings in the asteroid belt and installed on reinforced platforms. Ore haulers were stripped down to reduce mass and fitted with crude guidance systems. The fabricators ran non-stop, producing swarms of attack drones that looked more like angry metal insects than military hardware. It was desperate, improvised, and completely against every principle of proper military engineering. It was also the only chance they had. Earth sent what help it could. Supply ships arrived carrying explosives, communication equipment, and small arms for ground defense. Admiral Chen also sent something unexpected: volunteers. 200 military personnel and 300 civilian spacers had requested transfer to New Providence. They knew the odds. They understood that they were probably flying to their deaths. They came anyway because Elena's message had spread through Earth's military and civilian space services. Humanity was making a stand and people wanted to be part of it. Elena welcomed them all, put them to work, and tried not to think about how many of them would never see Earth again. The Chromath response to humanity's diplomatic mission was predictable. The envoys were received, allowed to speak, and then dismissed. The Chromath representative, a high-ranking official named Thakmor, released a public statement that was broadcast across known space. He expressed disappointment that humanity had chosen to waste time on pointless negotiations. The deadline remained unchanged. Humanity would withdraw or humanity would be removed. His final words became infamous throughout the galaxy. When asked about the possibility of human military resistance, Thakmor had laughed. The sound was harsh and grating, translated imperfectly but carrying clear contempt. "One fleet cannot stop us," Thakmor had said, his voice dripping with amusement. "The humans have 42 ships. We could send 100 and crush them without effort. We could send 500 and turn their homeworld into ash. They speak of resistance as if they have choices. They have none. In 30 days, humanity will retreat to Earth and accept their place as a minor species confined to one system. Or they will be exterminated. The decision is simple, and the outcome is already determined." The statement enraged people across Earth and every human colony. The casual dismissal, the absolute certainty, the implication that human lives meant nothing to these ancient powers. Elena watched the broadcast from New Providence and felt something crystallize inside her. The Chromath saw humanity as insects to be brushed aside. They believed their own propaganda about superior species and natural hierarchies. They had become so accustomed to intimidating younger civilizations that they had forgotten what desperation could drive people to do. Thakmore's words would become a rallying cry, but not in the way he intended. The 30-day deadline approached with terrible inevitability. 6 of the 7 human colonies had begun evacuations. Millions of people crowded onto transport ships, leaving behind homes and dreams. Only New Providence remained fully populated and defiant. Elena knew that other colonies thought they were fools or suicidal. Perhaps they were right, but someone needed to show the galaxy that humanity could not be dismissed so easily. Someone needed to make the Chromath pay a price for their arrogance. Even if that price was small, even if it changed nothing in the long run, it needed to be extracted. The Chromath fleet arrived on schedule. 100 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. They were beautiful in a terrible way, their hulls gleaming with exotic alloys, their weapons ports glowing with barely contained energy. The flagship was 3 kilometers long, a mobile fortress that could reduce a planet to rubble. The fleet commander sent one final message to New Providence: evacuate immediately or be destroyed. No negotiation, no mercy, just a simple choice between compliance and death. Elena stood in the command center, surrounded by her staff and the volunteers who had come from Earth. Every face showed fear, but also determination. They had spent 30 days preparing for this moment. Their improvised weapons were positioned throughout the system. Their plans were made. Their messages were recorded in case none of them survived to tell the story. Elena took a deep breath and opened a channel to the entire colony. 3,000 people listened as she spoke, her voice steady despite the terror in her heart. She told them that history would remember this day. Not because they would win, but because they refused to surrender. The Chromath believed that one fleet could not be stopped. Humanity was about to teach them a different lesson. It did not matter if you had one fleet or no fleet at all. What mattered was what you were willing to do with whatever you had. Elena ended her speech with words that would be repeated across human space for generations to come. They think we're weak because we're small. They think we'll run because they're strong. Today we show them what humanity really means. Today we fight. The Chromath fleet began moving toward New Providence, weapons charging, confident in their overwhelming superiority. They had crushed dozens of civilizations. They had never faced serious resistance from a newly spacefaring species. Commander Thakmore sat in his command chair and watched the tactical displays with bored efficiency. This would be over quickly. The humans had built some crude defenses, but nothing that could threaten his fleet. In a few hours, the colony would be destroyed, and humanity would learn the cost of defiance. He never imagined that within those few hours, his flagship would be burning, his fleet would be in chaos, and the galaxy would be watching in shocked disbelief as a species with 42 warships did the impossible. Elena gave the order to begin. Across the Kepler 442 system, improvised weapons came to life. The battle for humanity's future had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. The fire rises. The Chromath fleet moved through the Kepler 442 system with the casual confidence of apex predators. Commander Thakmore reviewed the tactical displays from his command throne aboard the dreadnought Eternal Dominion. His sensors showed the human colony world ahead, along with scattered defensive positions that seemed almost laughably inadequate. A few modified mining platforms, some cargo vessels positioned in awkward formations, and clouds of what appeared to be primitive drones. The humans had spent their 30 days building toys instead of evacuating. Thakmore felt a mixture of contempt and pity. This would not even qualify as a real battle in Chromath military records. The first indication that something was wrong came when the fleet passed through the outer asteroid belt. 6 ore haulers that had been drifting among the rocks suddenly activated their engines and accelerated toward the Chromath formation. Point defense systems tracked them immediately, identifying them as crude kinetic threats. Thakmore did not even bother to give orders. His weapons officers would handle such primitive tactics automatically. Plasma cannons swiveled and fired, destroying 5 of the approaching haulers in brilliant explosions. The sixth hauler took 3 hits but kept coming, its hull glowing red from the impacts. Then it detonated. The explosion was far larger than it should have been. The ore hauler had been packed with every gram of explosive the colonists could manufacture, along with the ship's fusion reactor set to overload. The blast wave caught 2 Chromath destroyers, overwhelming their shields and tearing through their hulls. Both ships tumbled away from the formation, venting atmosphere and debris. Thakmor sat up straighter in his throne. That had actually hurt, not significantly but enough to be noticed. He ordered his fleet to tighten formation and increase scanner sensitivity. Perhaps the humans had more surprises prepared. They did. As the Chromath fleet continued inward, the mining platforms that had seemed so harmless suddenly proved their worth. These were industrial lasers designed to cut through solid rock for hours at a time. The colonists had jury-rigged cooling systems, overcharged the power supplies, and aimed them at carefully calculated points in space. When the Chromath capital ships came within range, 8 mining platforms fired simultaneously. The beams were not as powerful as military-grade weapons, but they were sustained and focused. Shields designed to deflect quick energy bursts struggled against the constant pressure. One beam found a weak point in a cruiser's shield geometry and burned through to the hull. The laser carved a glowing line across the ship's flank, rupturing fuel tanks and destroying weapons emplacements. The cruiser broke formation, emergency systems screaming as crew members fought to contain the damage. Thakmor snarled orders, and his fleet opened fire on the mining platforms. The platforms were destroyed within seconds, but they had already served their purpose. They had proven that humanity would not die quietly, and they had bought time for the next phase of the defense. Elena watched from New Providence's command center as the battle unfolded exactly as she had planned. Every loss hurt, but every loss also mattered. The Chromath were bleeding now, their perfect formation disrupted, their commanders forced to actually think instead of just executing a routine extermination. She opened channels to the volunteer crews manning defensive positions throughout the system. They knew what to do next. Phase 2 was about to begin, and it would be far worse than anything the Chromath had encountered so far. The drone swarms launched from hidden positions scattered across 3 asteroid fields, thousands of small craft, each one barely larger than a ground vehicle, accelerated toward the Chromath fleet on chemical rockets. They were crude and ugly, built from whatever materials the fabricators could process quickly. Each drone carried a simple explosive charge and basic guidance systems cobbled together from mining equipment computers. Individually, they were barely threats. In mass, they were a nightmare. The Chromath point defense systems opened fire, destroying drones by the hundreds, but there were thousands more, and they came from multiple directions simultaneously. The first drones reached the fleet's outer screening vessels. They did not try to penetrate the shields. Instead, they detonated against them, creating cascading overloads that forced the shields to cycle and reset. In those brief moments of vulnerability, more drones struck home against bare hulls. Explosions rippled across destroyer and frigate hulls. Sensor arrays shattered. Weapons turrets were torn from their mountings. Communications arrays dissolved into spinning wreckage. Individual drone strikes did minimal damage, but dozens of strikes happening simultaneously across multiple ships created chaos. Thakmor watched his formation deteriorate with growing fury. This was not how battles were supposed to be fought. Where were the human warships? Where was the formal engagement between military forces? Instead, he faced an enemy that fought like vermin, using industrial equipment and suicide tactics. It was beneath the dignity of Chromath warriors to struggle against such methods. He ordered his fleet to accelerate toward the colony world itself. They would ignore the harassment and destroy the source. Once New Providence was reduced to ash, this insanity would end. That was exactly what Elena had been waiting for. The Chromath fleet rushed forward, and as they did, they left their defensive formation fully exposed. Hidden in the debris of destroyed mining platforms and disabled drones were 60 missiles that humanity had sent from Earth. Real military hardware, armed with fusion warheads and guided by combat-grade targeting systems. They had been positioned days ago, powered down and camouflaged, waiting for this exact moment. When the Chromath fleet passed through the engagement zone at high speed, the missiles activated and struck from behind. The explosions were devastating. Fusion fire washed over the sterns of a dozen Chromath vessels. Shields that had been weakened by drone strikes collapsed entirely, Hulls designed to withstand energy weapons crumpled under the kinetic impact of multi-megaton detonations. 3 destroyers simply ceased to exist, vaporized in nuclear fire. 2 cruisers tumbled out of control, their engine sections completely destroyed. Even the mighty dreadnought Eternal Dominion shuddered as a missile detonated against its aft shields, overloading generators and causing power fluctuations throughout the massive vessel. For the first time in the battle, the Chromath formation broke apart completely. Ships scattered, commanders shouting contradictory orders, confusion spreading through the fleet like poison. Thakmor roared commands demanding that his officers restore order, but the damage was done. The fleet that had entered the system with such arrogant confidence was now reeling from losses it had never anticipated. 17 ships destroyed or crippled, hundreds of Chromath warriors dead, all from a colony that was supposed to be helpless. Then Earth's fleet arrived. 42 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system and immediately accelerated toward the battle. Admiral Chen had timed the arrival perfectly. The Chromath were damaged, disorganized, and psychologically shaken. The human fleet was fresh and ready for combat. Chen had no illusions about winning a straight fight, but he did not need to win. He just needed to make the Chromath understand that every human life would cost them dearly. His ships moved into attack formation and opened fire at maximum range. The Chromath fleet tried to reform and meet this new threat, but they were fighting on 2 fronts now. New Providence continued launching drones and firing improvised weapons. Earth's fleet hammered them with missiles and energy weapons. Thakmor found himself commanding a battle that had spiraled completely out of his control. His ships were taking losses in a fight against opponents who should have been effortlessly crushed. The mathematics of the engagement were all wrong. Yes, the Chromath still had superior numbers and firepower. Yes, they would probably win eventually. But the cost was climbing far higher than anyone had imagined possible. The turning point came when a human destroyer named the Defiant executed a maneuver that violated every principle of sensible naval tactics. Captain Sarah Martinez had watched the battle unfold and recognized an opportunity. The Chromath dreadnought Eternal Dominion had moved forward of its supporting vessels while trying to reorganize the fleet. For exactly 40 seconds, it would be isolated and vulnerable. Martinez did not hesitate. She ordered emergency acceleration directly toward the dreadnought, pushing her ship's engines past safe limits. Every person on board knew they were not coming back from this. The Defiant accelerated to ramming speed. Chromath point defense systems opened fire, tearing chunks from the destroyer's hull. The bridge took a direct hit, killing Martinez and half her crew instantly. But the ship's momentum carried it forward, guided by emergency navigation systems and the determination of the surviving engineering crew. The Defiant struck Eternal Dominion amidships at a significant fraction of light speed. The collision released energy equivalent to a small nuclear weapon. The destroyer was annihilated instantly. The dreadnought's shields collapsed and its hull was torn open across 300 meters of its length. Thakmor was thrown from his command throne as his flagship shuddered like a wounded animal. Emergency systems screamed warnings. Atmosphere vented from ruptured compartments. Fires spread through damaged sections. The mighty Eternal Dominion, pride of the Chromath fleet, was crippled by a ship 1/20th its size that had simply refused to stop coming. Thakmor pulled himself upright, his golden eyes wide with something he had never felt before in combat. Fear. Not fear of death, but fear of what this battle represented. Humanity was supposed to be weak. They were supposed to run or die quickly. Instead, they fought like demons, and they were making the Chromath bleed for every meter of space. Admiral Chen watched the Defiant's sacrifice from his command ship and felt tears on his face. Martinez and her crew had given humanity something precious, time and hope. He immediately pressed the advantage, ordering his entire fleet to concentrate fire on the crippled dreadnought. If they could destroy or capture the Chromath flagship, the psychological impact would echo across the galaxy. Human weapons hammered into the Eternal Dominion's wounded hull. More compartments exploded. More Chromath warriors died. The great ship began to list, its engines failing, its weapons falling silent one by one. Thakmor made the hardest decision of his military career. He ordered retreat. The Chromath fleet, bloodied and humiliated, disengaged from combat and withdrew toward the edge of the system. They left behind 23 destroyed vessels and 6 more too damaged to make faster-than-light travel. The mighty armada that was supposed to effortlessly crush humanity had been fought to a standstill by improvised weapons and desperate courage. As the Chromath ships fled into the darkness, every sensor in the system recorded their departure. Every camera captured images of humanity's impossible victory. The battle for New Providence was over. The colony had survived, though at terrible cost. 800 colonists had died in the fighting. The Defiant and 4 other Earth warships were lost. Hundreds more people were wounded or traumatized by what they had witnessed. But they had won. Against all odds, against an enemy that should have destroyed them without effort, humanity had stood and fought and emerged victorious. Elena collapsed into her command chair, exhausted beyond measure, and allowed herself to weep for everyone they had lost and everything they had proven. The news spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. Every species in known space saw the footage of the battle. They watched human ships throw themselves at superior forces. They watched improvised weapons tear apart advanced warships. They watched the Chromath fleet retreat in disorder from an enemy they had dismissed as insignificant. The reaction was immediate and profound. Species that had cowered before the Chromath for centuries suddenly began to question whether such fear was justified. If humanity could resist, perhaps others could as well. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted, and everyone knew it. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. Representatives from 40 species gathered to discuss the implications of humanity's victory. The Chromath demanded sanctions against Earth for violating their territorial claims. Other species, emboldened by what they had seen, questioned those claims instead. Ancient treaties were reviewed. Territorial boundaries were debated. For the first time in living memory, the Chromath found themselves defending their actions rather than simply dictating terms. The council sessions lasted for weeks, and when they finally concluded, humanity had been granted formal recognition as a sovereign species with full rights to their existing colonies. Elena received a personal message from Admiral Chen 3 days after the battle. She watched his face on the screen and saw pride mixed with sorrow. He told her that Earth was mourning the lost crews and celebrating the saved colony in equal measure. Captain Martinez and the crew of the Defiant were being honored as heroes. The improvised defense of New Providence was already being studied at military academies across human space. Elena had done more than save one colony. She had given humanity a new identity. They were no longer the newcomers begging for acceptance. They were the species that fought back. Thakmor's final report to the Chromath High Command was brief and bitter. He acknowledged his failure to secure the objective.
He described human tactics as dishonorable and barbaric.
He recommended that the hegemony avoid future conflicts with humanity unless absolutely necessary, because humans did not fight like rational beings. They fought like cornered animals, using every weapon available and accepting casualties that would break any sensible military force. The High Command read his report and understood the unspoken message. The Chromath had spent centuries building a reputation for invincibility. Humanity had shattered that reputation in a single afternoon. Commander Elena Vasquez stood once again at the observation window of New Providence's headquarters. The sun was setting over the colony, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. In the valley below, farmers were returning to their fields. Children played in the streets. Life continued despite everything that had happened. Elena thought about Thakmor's words that had started this whole nightmare. One fleet cannot stop us. He had been right in a way. One fleet could not stop the Chromath. But humanity had proven something far more important. One fleet did not need to stop them. One colony, fighting with improvised weapons and unbreakable spirit, could make even the mightiest empire bleed. The galaxy had laughed at humanity's defiance. They had dismissed human courage as foolishness and human resistance as futile. Then the battle had been fought and the laughter had died in shocked silence. Humanity had spoken, and they had spoken in fire and blood and the sacrifice of heroes who refused to surrender. The message had been received across every star system in known space. Humanity was here to stay. Anyone who wanted to remove them would pay a price they could not afford. The age of casual dismissal was over. The age of humanity had begun. News networks across Earth broadcast Elena's final message to the Chromath fleet. She had recorded it while the battle still raged. Knowing she might not survive to deliver it personally, her face was smudged with smoke and her voice was hoarse from shouting orders. But her words carried power that resonated across the stars. She spoke directly to every species that thought humanity could be pushed aside or eliminated. She told them that humans had left Earth seeking peace and opportunity, but they would not be driven back by threats or violence. Every human life was precious, but every human was also willing to die defending their right to exist. The message ended with words that became humanity's unofficial motto in the centuries that followed. Elena looked into the camera with eyes that had seen too much death and too much courage, and she spoke with absolute conviction. You thought one fleet could not stop you. You were right, but you forgot something important. We do not need to stop you. We just need to make you wish you had never started. Remember New Providence. Remember the defiant. Remember that humanity does not surrender. We do not break. We do not forget, and we never ever stop fighting for what is ours. The recording ended, but its impact continued forever. Humanity had earned its place among the stars not through superior technology or ancient lineage, but through the simple refusal to accept defeat. They had proven that courage and ingenuity could overcome vast differences in power. They had shown the galaxy that new species deserved respect, not because of what they inherited, but because of what they were willing to sacrifice. The Chromath had given humanity an ultimatum and expected compliance. Instead, they received a lesson they would never forget. Years later, when human diplomats met with representatives from other species, they often heard the same story. The Battle of New Providence had inspired resistance movements across the galaxy. Species that had lived under Chromath domination for generations had watched humans fight back and decided to do the same. The Chromath hegemony still existed, still commanded impressive military forces, but they no longer dictated terms with casual arrogance. They had learned that every species, no matter how young or weak they appeared, deserved to be treated with respect, and if that respect was not given willingly, humanity had shown the galaxy exactly how to take it by force. Elena Vasquez lived to see humanity establish 20 more colonies across a dozen star systems. She watched Earth's fleet grow from 42 ships to over 300. She saw the Galactic Council grant humanity a permanent seat and voting rights. She witnessed the slow transformation of human society, from desperate survivors to confident explorers. But she never forgot the price that had been paid for that transformation. Every year on the anniversary of the battle, she visited the memorial on New Providence where the names of the 800 fallen colonists were carved in stone beside the names of Martinez and her crew. The galaxy had laughed at humanity and learned to regret it. The Chromath had issued an ultimatum and paid in blood for their arrogance. One fleet had not stopped them, but one colony had proven that humanity could not be stopped either. The fire that burned in human hearts, the determination to defend what was theirs, the willingness to sacrifice everything for freedom. These things could not be extinguished by superior numbers or advanced technology. Humanity had spoken in fire, and the entire galaxy had been forced to listen. The age of dismissing humanity was over. The age of fearing humanity had begun.